Good evening, dear traveler of the night. Welcome. Welcome to another gentle journey into the realm of dreams. I am your guide tonight, your storyteller, your companion through the velvet darkness that awaits us both. Settle in now. Let your pillows embrace you like clouds. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, floating away like autumn leaves upon a still pond. Your blankets are warm, so wonderfully warm, wrapping around you in the most comforting cocoon. Breathe in slowly, deeply. Let the air fill your lungs with peace. And as you exhale, release every worry, every concern, every thought that no longer serves you this evening. Tonight, I shall tell you a tale of ancient castles and mountain mists, of moonlit journeys and mysterious encounters. It is a story inspired by legends older than memory itself, tales whispered around dying fires in distant lands where wolves still howl at the pale moon. This is the tale of the Count of Shadows. Close your eyes, now if you wish, or let them grow heavy as you listen to my voice. Either way, you are safe here, perfectly safe. And the story is about to begin. The year was 1893, in the month of May, when young Jonathan Harker first set foot upon the winding roads that led eastward into the Carpathian Mountains. He was a solicitor's clerk from London, barely 25 years of age, with bright eyes full of ambition and a heart engaged to be married to the sweetest woman in all of England, his beloved Mina. The firm of Hawkins and Associates had entrusted Jonathan with a most peculiar assignment. A foreign nobleman, a count from the distant lands of Transylvania, wished to purchase an estate in England. The negotiations required Jonathan to travel to the Count's ancestral home, to finalize the documents in person, and to ensure that every legal matter was properly attended to. It was an opportunity young Jonathan could not refuse. Such a commission could make his career, could provide for his future with Mina, could establish him as a man of consequence in the legal profession. And so, with letters of introduction in his leather satchel and hope in his heart, he had embarked upon his journey. The first days of travel had been pleasant enough. The trains had carried him through the green countryside of England, across the choppy waters of the Channel, through the elegant cities of France and the ancient towns of Germany. He had marveled at Munich with its grand architecture, had tasted strange and wonderful foods, had practiced the few phrases of German and Romanian he had learned from a small phrase book. But as the miles accumulated behind him, as the landscape began to change from the familiar to the foreign, young Jonathan noticed something else changing as well: the demeanor of the people he encountered. In Munich, when he had mentioned his destination, the innkeeper's wife had crossed herself and whispered a prayer. In Vienna, a fellow traveler had looked at him with such pity that Jonathan had felt compelled to check his own reflection, wondering if some illness had marked his face. And now, as his carriage wound deeper into the mountains, the driver had grown increasingly silent, his knuckles white upon the reins. But let us not rush ahead, dear listener. Let us travel with Jonathan, step by step, mile by mile, into the heart of this ancient land. Feel the gentle rocking of the carriage as it moves along the mountain road. Hear the soft clop of horses' hooves upon packed earth. Smell the pine and wild herbs that perfume the crisp mountain air. Jonathan sat by the carriage window, his journal open upon his lap. He had promised Mina that he would keep a detailed account of his travels, that she might experience something of his adventure through his words. He wrote by the fading afternoon light. 4th of May. The countryside grows wilder with each passing hour. We have left behind the last vestiges of what might be called civilization, and now travel through forests that seem untouched by human hands. The trees grow close together, their branches intertwining overhead, like the fingers of old friends meeting after long separation. The local people are most curious. They are dressed in colorful traditional clothing, white shirts embroidered with intricate patterns, wide leather belts, and boots that look made for traversing rough terrain. The women wear headscarves and long skirts, and many of them have made gestures toward me that I take to be protective in nature. When I showed the driver my letter of introduction, mentioning that I was to meet with Count Dracula at his castle, the reaction was most extraordinary. The man's face went pale as fresh snow, and several nearby villagers gathered round, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. One old woman pressed a small crucifix into my hands, her eyes brimming with tears, muttering what I assumed were prayers or blessings. I confess I am somewhat bewildered by their behavior. Is the Count such a fearsome figure to his people? Perhaps it is merely the superstition of simple country folk, unused to foreign travelers. I shall endeavor to keep an open mind. Jonathan closed his journal as the carriage began to slow. They had arrived at a small village, the last stop before the final leg of his journey. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Smoke curled from cottage chimneys, and the smell of cooking food drifted through the evening air. The inn was a sturdy building of stone and timber, its windows glowing with warm candlelight. As Jonathan stepped down from the carriage, stretching his travel-weary limbs, the innkeeper emerged to greet him. Good evening," the man said, his English thickly accented but understandable. "You are the English gentleman, yes? You stay tonight, yes? Tomorrow is too late for traveling. The Borgo Pass, it is not safe after dark." Jonathan smiled politely. "I thank you for your hospitality. I am expected at Castle Dracula. A carriage is to meet me at the pass at midnight." The innkeeper's welcoming expression faltered. His wife, who had appeared in the doorway, crossed herself rapidly and retreated back into the inn. The few villagers who had gathered to observe the stranger suddenly found urgent business elsewhere, melting away into the gathering dusk like morning mist before the sun. "Please," the innkeeper said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Please, young sir, do not go. Tomorrow is the eve of St. George's Day. At midnight, all the evil things in the world have power. Stay here where it is safe. In the morning, return to your England. Forget this business." Jonathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. But he was a practical young man, raised on English common sense and the rational principles of law. He did not believe in superstitions, in demons, in things that went bump in the night. He believed in contracts, in obligations, in the importance of keeping one's word. "I appreciate your concern," he said gently. "Truly I do. But I have made a commitment. The Count is expecting me. It would be most unprofessional to fail in my duty." The innkeeper studied him for a long moment, something like sorrow in his weathered eyes. Then he sighed and nodded, accepting what he could not change. "Then come inside, young sir. Eat, drink, rest. You will need your strength for the journey ahead." And he hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "Please take this. Wear it around your neck. It will protect you." It was a rosary, old and worn, the wooden beads smooth from years of devoted use. Jonathan accepted it, touched by the gesture despite his skepticism. He tucked it into his shirt pocket and followed the innkeeper inside. The inn's common room was a warm and welcoming space, dear listener. Imagine it with me now. A large stone fireplace dominates one wall, a cheerful fire crackling within, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn ceiling beams. Wooden tables and benches fill the room, their surfaces polished smooth by generations of elbows and spilled drinks. The air is rich with the aroma of roasting meat, fresh bread, and unfamiliar spices that tickle the nose in the most pleasant way. Jonathan was shown to a seat near the fire, and the innkeeper's wife, having overcome her initial fright, bustled about preparing a meal for their foreign guest. Despite her earlier reaction, she proved to be a kind and attentive hostess, bringing dish after dish to Jonathan's table. First came a bowl of thick soup, rich with vegetables and tender pieces of chicken, flavored with paprika that gave it a warm, ruddy color. The bread that accompanied it was dark and dense, still warm from the oven, with a crust that crackled satisfyingly when broken. Then came the main course, a hearty stew that the innkeeper called paprikash, chunks of meat swimming in a creamy sauce that was both spicy and comforting. There were also pickled vegetables, tangy and crisp, and a salad of fresh greens dressed with oil and vinegar. To drink, they brought him wine, a deep red vintage from local grapes, full-bodied and warming. Jonathan sipped it slowly, feeling the tension of the journey begin to ease from his shoulders. As he ate, the villagers gradually returned to the common room, taking their customary seats, speaking quietly among themselves. Jonathan noticed that many of them cast glances in his direction, not hostile, but curious, and he thought, concerned. It was as if he were a man preparing to walk into a lion's den, and they were the helpless observers who could only watch and pray. An old woman approached his table. She was ancient beyond reckoning, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes bright and knowing despite her years. She wore the traditional dress of the region, a white blouse embroidered with red and gold thread, a black vest, a full skirt of midnight blue. Around her neck hung dozens of necklaces, beads, crosses, small pouches that Jonathan suspected contained herbs or charms. "You go to the castle of the dragon," she said. It was not a question. Jonathan nodded, unsure how to respond. The old woman sat down across from him uninvited, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her own was small and dry, like the claw of an aged bird, but surprisingly strong. "You are young," she said. "Young and pure of heart. I can see it. The darkness will be drawn to you as moth to flame. But there is also strength in you. Strength you do not yet know you possess. Madam, I appreciate your concern, but surely—" She squeezed his hand, silencing him. "Listen. Listen well, for you will not hear these words again. The one you go to meet, he is old. Not old as I am old as the mountains, old as the forests. He has been lord of that castle since before the memory of the oldest grandfather in this village. He does not age. He does not die. He is Nosferatu." Jonathan knew the word. He had read of it in his research. It meant undead. "The Count is nobility," he said, attempting to maintain his rational, composure. An old family, certainly, but old blood, the woman interrupted. Very old blood, and he hungers for more. Before Jonathan could respond, the innkeeper appeared and gently but firmly guided the old woman away, speaking to her in soothing Romanian. The common room fell silent for a moment. Then conversation resumed, though quieter than before. Jonathan finished his meal in contemplative silence. The fire crackled, the wine warmed his belly. Despite the strange warnings, he felt drowsy, peaceful. The journey had been long, and his body craved rest. The innkeeper's wife showed him to his room, a small but clean chamber on the upper floor, with a narrow bed covered in handmade quilts, a washstand in the corner, and a window that looked out over the darkening mountains. The last rays of sunset painted the distant peaks in shades of purple and gold. Jonathan unpacked his few belongings, washed his face and hands in the cool water provided, and changed into his nightshirt. He intended to write more in his journal, to record the strange events of the evening while they were fresh in his mind. But the bed was so soft, the quilts so warm, and his eyes so heavy. He climbed beneath the covers, promising himself he would write in the morning. Within moments, sleep claimed him, deep and dreamless, the sleep of the truly exhausted. Outside his window, the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the sleeping village. An owl hooted somewhere in the nearby forest. A wolf howled far away, its song melancholy and ancient. And in the mountains above, high on a craggy peak where a castle's dark silhouette cut the moonlit sky, something stirred. Something that had waited centuries for this moment. Something that was very, very hungry. Jonathan woke to insistent knocking upon his chamber door. For a moment, he was disoriented, unsure of where he was. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, the sounds and smells strange. Then memory returned. The journey, the village, the inn, the warnings. "Young sir," came the innkeeper's voice through the door. "It is near 11 o'clock. If you are still determined to go, you must prepare. The carriage to the Borgo Pass leaves in 20 minutes. Jonathan sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Through his window, he could see only darkness, the profound darkness of a mountain night, unmarred by the gas lamps and streetlights of London. Stars blazed overhead with an intensity he had never witnessed in England, and the moon hung low and fat on the horizon, impossibly large, impossibly bright. He dressed quickly, his fingers fumbling with buttons and ties in the unfamiliar darkness. He gathered his belongings, checked that his documents were secure, and descended to the common room. The inn was quieter now than it had been earlier. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim, reddish glow across the room. A few villagers remained, nursing drinks in the corners, their faces hidden in shadow. They watched Jonathan with silent intensity as he crossed to the door. The innkeeper pressed a package into his hands, bread and cheese wrapped in cloth. "For the journey," he said. "You may not have opportunity to eat where you are going." His wife appeared behind him, holding a small lantern. She pressed something else into Jonathan's pocket. When he looked, he saw it was a small bottle of holy water. He started to protest, to explain that he was not a particularly religious man, but something in her eyes stopped him. Whatever comfort the gesture brought her, it would be cruel to refuse. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you both for your kindness." Outside, A carriage waited, a local conveyance, not the grand coach he expected from a nobleman. The driver was bundled against the cold, his face hidden beneath a wide hat. He said nothing as Jonathan climbed aboard, merely flicked the reins, and the horses began to move. The road wound upward into the mountains. The temperature dropped as they gained altitude, and Jonathan wrapped his traveling cloak tightly around himself, grateful for its warmth. The forest pressed close on either side, ancient trees whose branches reached toward the carriage like grasping fingers, their leaves rustling in a wind that whispered secrets in languages long forgotten. Mist began to gather as they climbed higher, not the gentle fog of English mornings, but something thicker, more purposeful. It crept between the trees like a living thing, swirling around the carriage wheels, muffling the sounds of the horses' hooves. The world beyond the carriage windows became a study in shades of gray. Gray trees, gray sky, gray earth, all blending together in the moonlit haze. Jonathan checked his pocket watch. 1:15. The Borgo Pass was a narrow gap between two towering peaks, a natural corridor through the mountain range that had been used by travelers for centuries untold. Here, where the roads split, one path leading down into distant valleys, another climbing further into the heights, Jonathan's carriage came to a halt. "We wait here," the driver said, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough, rusty with disuse. "For how long?" The driver pointed upward, toward the mountain peak that loomed above them. "Until he comes." Jonathan peered into the mist, but could see nothing. The silence was absolute. Not even the wind stirred now. It was as if the very world was holding its breath. Then he heard it. At first, it was nothing more than a distant rumble like thunder heard from far away. But it grew louder, closer, resolving itself into the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, moving at tremendous speed. The local driver crossed himself, muttered a prayer, and suddenly whipped his horses into motion, the carriage lurching away down the road before Jonathan could even cry out. He found himself standing alone at the crossroads, his luggage at his feet, watching the local carriage disappear into the mist below. The hoofbeats grew louder still, and now he could see something approaching from above. A shape in the darkness, darker than the night around it. It was a coach, a great black coach drawn by 4 magnificent horses, black as midnight, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural red light. The coach was ancient in design, ornate with strange symbols carved into its panels, and on the driver's seat sat a figure wrapped in a dark cloak, face hidden in shadow, hands gripping the reins with an authority that suggested absolute command. The coach came to a perfect stop before Jonathan, the horses standing utterly still, not even breathing hard despite their apparent sprint down the mountain. "Welcome to my country," said a voice from within the shadow of the cloak. It was a deep voice, rich and resonant, with an accent that Jonathan could not quite place. "I am glad you have come. Come, enter my carriage. The castle is still some distance away, and the night grows cold." Jonathan hesitated. Every warning he had received echoed in his mind. The innkeeper's pleas, the old woman's prophecies, the driver's fearful prayers. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, feeling the rosary, the holy water, the small comforts that his rational mind insisted were mere superstition. But what choice did he have? He was alone, in the middle of mountains he did not know, with no means of returning to the village below. And despite the strangeness of the situation, He was still a professional. He had a job to do. The Count was expecting him. He gathered his luggage, approached the coach, and opened the door. The interior was lined in deep red velvet, worn but well-maintained. A faint scent hung in the air. Old books, perhaps, or ancient stone. A single lantern swung gently from the ceiling, casting just enough light to see by. Jonathan settled onto the seat, arranging his bags beside him, and the coach began to move. They traveled in silence for some time. The road grew rougher, steeper, winding through passages that seemed too narrow for such a grand coach to navigate. Yet navigate them it did, the horses moving with uncanny precision, never stumbling, never slowing. Jonathan found himself growing drowsy despite his anxiety. The motion of the coach was surprisingly smooth, almost hypnotic. The lantern swung gently back and forth, its light creating dancing shadows on the velvet walls. His eyelids grew heavy. No. He shook himself awake. Something felt wrong. He should be alert, observant. He pulled back the curtain that covered the coach window and peered outside. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. They were passing along the edge of a precipice, a sheer drop of thousands of feet, disappearing into darkness below. There was no road that he could see, no visible path. The horses seemed to be walking on air itself, their hooves finding purchase on nothing at all. Jonathan blinked, convinced he must be dreaming. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. This time he could make out a narrow ledge, carved into the mountainside, barely wide enough for the coach wheels, yet perfectly flat and smooth. The horses walked with absolute confidence, as if they had traveled this path 10,000 times before. Perhaps they had. Above them, appearing through breaks in the cloud and mist, Jonathan caught his first glimpse of their destination, Castle Dracula. It rose from the mountain peak like a natural formation, as if the stone of the mountain itself had been convinced to take this shape, to twist and reach toward the sky in towers and battlements and curtain walls. It was massive, ancient, seemingly abandoned. No lights burned in its windows, no flags flew from its towers. It sat in brooding silence, overlooking the valleys below like a predator surveying its domain. Yet there was also a terrible beauty to it. The architecture was unlike anything Jonathan had seen, a blend of styles from many centuries, many cultures, as if the castle had been added to again and again over countless generations. Moonlight caught on what remained of ornate carvings, of statues, of decorative elements that spoke of wealth and power beyond imagining. The coach began its final ascent toward the castle gates. The gates themselves were enormous, two great doors of iron-bound oak, set into walls that must have been 20 feet thick. As the coach approached, they swung slowly open, seemingly of their own accord. Beyond was a courtyard, paved with ancient cobblestones, surrounding a dried fountain that had once, perhaps, been quite magnificent. The coach came to a halt. The driver, whom Jonathan had still not seen clearly, made no move to descend or to assist his passenger. After a moment of uncertain waiting, Jonathan opened the coach door himself and stepped down into the courtyard. The night air was cold, far colder than it had been in the village below. His breath misted before him in thick clouds. The moon had risen higher now, and its light turned everything to silver and shadow. A great door at the top of a flight of stone steps began to open. Light spilled from within, warm, golden, inviting. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the glow. Then it began to descend the stairs, moving with a grace that belied its apparent age, until it stood before Jonathan in the moonlight. And he saw the Count for the first time. He was tall, taller than Jonathan by half a head, and dressed entirely in black, without a speck of color anywhere about him. His face was long and pale, clean-shaven, with high cheekbones and a nose that curved like the beak of some proud bird. His hair was long and gray, swept back from his forehead, revealing a high, domed brow. His eyebrows were heavy, almost meeting in the middle, and his eyes were dark, so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And yet they gleamed with an intelligence, an intensity that was almost hypnotic. Looking into them, Jonathan felt as if he were standing at the edge of a very deep well, gazing down into unfathomable depths. But the Count's smile, when it came, was warm, almost gentle. "Welcome," he said, and his voice was the same deep, resonant tone Jonathan had heard from the coach. "Welcome to my home. I am Count Dracula, and you are most welcome." He extended his hand, and Jonathan took it automatically. Shut it up. Count's grip was strong, surprisingly so, for a man of his apparent years. His skin was cold, so cold that it sent a shiver up Jonathan's arm, and as their hands clasped, Jonathan noticed something else. The Count's palm was covered in hair, fine and bristle-like, and his nails were long and pointed, almost like claws. But the moment passed in an instant, and then the Count was releasing his hand and gesturing toward the open door. "Come," he said. "You must be tired and hungry after your journey. I have prepared a meal and a warm fire. We shall have plenty of time to discuss business in the days ahead. But tonight you must rest." The interior of the castle, dear listener, was not at all what young Jonathan had expected. He had imagined something cold and forbidding, stone walls dripping with damp, cobwebs in every corner, suits of armor standing sentinel in dusty hallways. What he found instead was surprising warmth, surprising comfort. The entrance hall was, large to be sure, its ceiling lost in shadow high above. But great tapestries hung upon the walls, their ancient threads still rich with color, deep reds and blues and golds, depicting scenes of hunting and battle and courtly life. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, and within it a fire blazed cheerfully, casting dancing light across the polished stone floor. The Count led Jonathan through a series of corridors, each more ornately decorated than the last. Here were paintings in gilded frames, portraits of stern-faced men and beautiful women, landscapes of mountains and forests and distant seas. There were sculptures of marble and bronze, bookcases stuffed with ancient volumes, Persian carpets in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the flickering firelight. "My family has lived in this castle for many centuries," the Count explained as they walked, his voice echoing softly off the stone walls. "Much has been accumulated over the years. I have been reluctant to part with any of it. Each piece has its memories, its stories. To remove even one would be like cutting away a piece of my own flesh." Jonathan nodded politely, though something in the Count's words struck him as odd. He spoke of centuries as if he had witnessed them personally. "Here," the Count said, stopping before a heavy wooden door. "This will be your chamber during your stay. I believe you will find it comfortable. Beyond is a small library, which you are welcome to use at any hour." The dining room is on the floor below. I shall await you there whenever you are ready." He opened the door and gestured for Jonathan to enter. Jonathan ate with enthusiasm, his appetite sharpened by the mountain air and the long journey. The Count sat across from him, nursing a single glass of deep red wine, watching with an expression that might have been amusement, might have been something else entirely. "The food pleases you?" the Count inquired. "Very much so," Jonathan replied between bites. "My compliments to your cook." Something flickered across the Count's face, too quickly to identify. "I have no cook," he said. "I have no servants at all, in fact, not anymore. The castle is mine alone to maintain." Jonathan paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "But this meal, the fires, the preparations—" "I prepared everything myself," the Count said simply. "I may be old, young friend, but I am not yet incapable. And I wished your welcome to be fitting." They spoke as Jonathan ate. The Count proved to be an excellent conversationalist, learned, witty, interested in everything. He asked Jonathan about England, its customs, its laws, its people. He asked about London, its streets, its buildings, its social life. He had a particular interest in real estate, in understanding the English market, the procedures for purchasing property. "I have grown weary of these mountains," the Count explained, gazing out the window at the darkness beyond. "For centuries, I have watched the world change from afar. I have read of great cities, of scientific advancement, of the bustle and energy of modern life. I wish to experience it for myself, to walk among crowds, to feel the pulse of a great metropolis, to live, truly live, for the first time in longer than you can imagine." His voice was wistful, almost sad. Jonathan felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. To be so old, so isolated, so far from the wider world, it must be terribly lonely. "England will welcome you, I'm sure," Jonathan offered. "London society is quite open to foreign nobility. There are many from the continent who have made their homes there." The Count smiled, and again Jonathan noticed his teeth, long, sharp, gleaming white in the candlelight. "That is good to hear. I have much to learn, I think, before I can move successfully among your people. The manners, the accents, the customs, I would not wish to seem strange." The hour grew late as they talked. Jonathan found himself growing drowsy again, lulled by the warmth of the fire, the fullness of his stomach, the comfort of the chair. His eyelids drooped. His responses grew slower. The Count noticed. "Forgive me," he said, rising from his seat. "I have kept you too long. You must rest. Tomorrow we shall begin our business in earnest. But for now, sleep. Sleep, young Jonathan, and dream of your England." He escorted Jonathan back to his chamber, bid him good night, and departed. Jonathan barely had the energy to undress before collapsing into the magnificent bed. The mattress received him like a cloud, the quilts wrapping around him in warmth and softness. Sleep came quickly, dear listener, deeply, dreamlessly, and in the darkness of the castle, somewhere in the endless corridors, the Count walked alone. He did not sleep. He had not slept in centuries, but he was patient, very patient. And now at last his plans were beginning to unfold. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm for young Jonathan. He would wake late in the afternoon, later than he had ever slept in his life, to find a meal waiting for him in the dining room. The Count would join him, not to eat, but to talk, to ask questions, to guide Jonathan through the legal documents that would transfer ownership of the English estate. The property in question was called Carfax, an old house on the outskirts of London, with extensive grounds and an ancient chapel on the property. Jonathan had researched it before leaving England. It had been empty for many years, considered by the locals to be unsuitable for habitation. There were rumors of peculiar sounds at night, of lights seen in windows when no one should be present, of a general atmosphere of wrongness that clung to the place. The Count had been most specific in his requirements. Carfax suited him perfectly, isolated yet accessible, old yet structurally sound, with grounds large enough to ensure privacy. And there was one other requirement, which Jonathan had found puzzling at the time, but which the Count explained simply as a matter of practicality. The estate must include sufficient storage space for a large quantity of wooden boxes. Earth from my homeland, the Count explained. A peculiarity of my condition, you understand. I find that I cannot sleep well unless I am near the soil of Transylvania. I will have boxes of this earth shipped to England, to be placed throughout the house. 50 boxes in all. It seemed an odd request, but Jonathan had encountered many eccentric nobles in his brief legal career. The wealthy had their peculiarities. It was not his place to question, only to serve. Yet as the days passed, Jonathan began to notice things. Small things at first, easily explained, but accumulating one upon another until they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. The Count was never present during the daylight hours. Always he appeared, only after sunset, remaining awake and active until just before dawn. He made excuse after excuse. He was ill, he was busy, he was indisposed, but the pattern was consistent. There were no mirrors in the castle. Jonathan searched, curious, but found not a single reflective surface anywhere. The Count explained this too. He found mirrors to be vanity, a distraction from more important matters. But it seemed strange in a castle so otherwise well appointed. And then there were the things Jonathan observed when the Count was present. Small details that, taken individually, meant nothing, but taken together. The Count never ate, never drank anything but wine, and even that seemed more for show than sustenance. His hands were strange, the palms hairy, the nails long and pointed, filed to a cruel sharpness. His teeth, when he smiled, were too long, too white, too sharp. He cast no reflection. Jonathan discovered this by accident, when they stood before a window and he noticed that only his own form was visible in the glass, and his skin was cold. So terribly, terribly cold. Jonathan wrote all of this in his journal, struggling to make sense of it. The rational part of his mind insisted there must be reasonable explanations. The Count was simply eccentric, an old man with unusual habits, perhaps touched by some illness that affected his circulation and appetite. The missing reflections were tricks of the light, nothing more. But another part of him, a deeper, more primitive part, was beginning to understand something that his conscious mind refused to accept. The old woman's words echoed in his memory. Nosferatu. Undead? Surely not. Surely such things belong to children's stories, to peasant superstitions. In the rational modern age of steam engines and electric lights, there was no room for monsters. Was there? During the daylight hours, when the Count was absent, Jonathan took to exploring the castle. He told himself it was simple curiosity, the professional interest of a man who dealt in property and real estate. But he knew, deep down, that he was looking for answers, looking for proof, one way or another. The castle was enormous, far larger than it appeared from outside. Corridor led to corridor, chamber to chamber, each more ancient and dusty than the last. Some areas showed signs of recent habitation. The rooms Jonathan used, the dining hall, the library. But others had clearly been abandoned for decades, perhaps centuries. Furniture lay beneath dust covers. Cobwebs hung in thick curtains from the ceilings. Rats scurried in the shadows, and many doors were locked. This was the most troubling discovery. Jonathan tried door after door, only to find them sealed against him. The Count had given him free run of the castle, or so he had said. But clearly there were limits to that freedom. One afternoon, Jonathan found a door that was not locked but simply stuck, its hinges rusted with disuse. With considerable effort, he forced it open and found himself in a long gallery, its walls lined with more portraits. These were different from the portraits elsewhere in the castle. Those had depicted the Count's ancestors, noble men and women in the costume of various centuries, their expressions stern and dignified. These portraits depicted something else entirely. They were portraits of the Count himself. Jonathan moved along the gallery, studying each painting in turn. Here was the Count in the armor of a medieval knight, sword raised for battle. Here he was in the robes of a Renaissance prince, seated upon a throne. Here in the dress of a 17th century nobleman. Here in the military uniform of the Napoleonic era. The clothing changed, the settings changed, but the face was always the same. The same high forehead, the same aquiline nose, the same thin lips, the same dark, bottomless eyes. The oldest portrait, hanging at the far end of the gallery, depicted a man in Byzantine armor, standing before a battlefield littered with the impaled bodies of his enemies. The brass plate beneath it gave a date, 1462, more than 400 years ago. Jonathan stood before this painting for a long time, his heart pounding, his mind racing. The rational explanations he had been constructing so carefully began to crumble. He thought of the old woman's words. He thought of the strange behavior he had witnessed. He thought of the cold hands, the long teeth, the absence of any reflection. And for the first time, he allowed himself to consider the impossible. But let us leave young Jonathan to his disturbing discoveries for a moment, dear listener. Let us take a breath together, you and I. Let us remember that this is only a story, a tale told in the soft hours of the night, meant to carry you gently towards sleep. Outside your window, perhaps, the moon is shining. Perhaps the stars are bright. Perhaps a gentle rain is falling, or a soft breeze is rustling the leaves. Whatever the night holds for you, know that you are safe, perfectly safe. Wrapped in your blankets, cradled in comfort. Breathe in and out, in and out. Let the story continue to unfold around you, like a river flowing past, carrying you toward dreams. It was on his 12th night at the castle that Jonathan finally accepted the truth. He could no longer deny what his eyes had seen, what his reason could not explain away. The Count was not merely an eccentric nobleman. He was something else entirely, something ancient, something terrible. And Jonathan was his prisoner. He had tried, that afternoon, to leave. He had packed his bags, made his way to the great entrance hall, and attempted to open the front doors. They were locked from the outside. He tried every door on the ground floor, every window, all sealed, all barred. He ran through the castle, searching for another exit. The few windows that would open looked out over sheer drops of hundreds of feet. The doors that might lead to courtyards or gardens were all locked tight. The castle, he realized, was not merely a home. It was a fortress, a prison, and he was the only prisoner. That night, when the Count appeared as usual, Jonathan confronted him. "I wish to leave," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "My business here is concluded. The documents are signed. I should return to England." The Count smiled his thin, cold smile. "But you have only just arrived, my friend. Surely you would not deprive me of your company so soon." "I must return. I have obligations. My fiancée." "Your fiancée will wait," the Count said, and his voice had changed. It was no longer friendly, no longer warm. It was ancient and cold, like wind from a tomb. "As will your other obligations. You will remain here as my guest for some time yet. There is much I must learn from you, Jonathan. Much you will teach me about your England before I depart for her shores." Jonathan stepped back, fear rising in his throat. "What are you?" he whispered. The Count's smile widened, and now there was no pretense of humanity in it. His teeth gleamed in the firelight, longer than before, sharper, curving to cruel points. His eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. "I am Dracula," he said simply. "I am the dragon. I am the night. I have been lord of these mountains for 500 years, drinking the blood of my enemies, ruling from shadows. And soon, very soon, I shall be lord of your England as well." He moved closer, and Jonathan found he could not look away from those terrible eyes. They seemed to pierce his very soul, to read his thoughts, to paralyze his will. "You will remain here," the Count continued, his voice low and hypnotic. "And you will answer my questions. You will teach me your language perfectly, your manners, your customs. And when I have learned all that I need to know—" He leaned closer, close enough that Jonathan could feel the cold radiating from his skin, could smell something ancient and wrong on his breath. "When I have learned all that I need to know," the Count whispered, "I will feed." What followed, dear listener, were the longest and most terrible weeks of Jonathan Harker's young life. He was trapped in the castle with a monster, a creature of nightmare, a thing that should not exist. And yet it did exist. And it was very, very real. Jonathan learned to survive. He moved through the castle during daylight hours when the Count slept, if sleep it could be called, somewhere in the castle's depths. He searched for means of escape, for weapons, for any advantage he might find. At night, when the Count rose, he played the obedient guest, answering questions, maintaining the fiction of normalcy. The Count was a meticulous student. He practiced his English for hours each night, correcting his accent, learning slang and idioms, mastering the subtle distinctions of class and breeding that marked English society. He questioned Jonathan about every aspect of London life, the layout of the streets, the schedules of trains and ships, the habits of the wealthy, the vulnerabilities of the poor. And gradually, terribly, Jonathan began to understand what the Count intended. The Count did not simply wish to live in England. He wished to feed there, to hunt, to build an army of creatures like himself, spreading his dark influence across the greatest city in the world. The boxes of earth that Jonathan had arranged to be shipped, they were not for mere comfort. They were nests, hiding places, staging points for a campaign of terror that would begin in London and spread slowly but surely across the entire British Empire. And Jonathan had helped him. Unknowingly, unwillingly, but nonetheless, he had helped. His legal expertise had smoothed the way. His knowledge of English law and custom had made it possible. He was complicit in whatever horrors were to come. The guilt weighed upon him like a physical burden. At night, alone in his chamber, he would weep for himself, for Mina, for the innocent people who would suffer because of his actions. He wrote everything in his journal, hoping that somehow, someday, it might reach the outside world, might serve as a warning. And then there were the other things, the things that made Jonathan question his own sanity. One night, venturing into a part of the castle he had not explored before, he found a chamber that was clearly still inhabited. The furniture was fresh, the air perfumed, the bed covers still warm. And as he stood there, 3 figures materialized from the shadows. They were women, beautiful women. 2 were dark-haired, with great dark eyes that sparkled in the candlelight. The third was fair, with hair like moonlight and lips as red as blood. They wore gowns of white silk, thin and flowing, and they moved toward him with a grace that was not quite human. "The master has brought us a gift," one of them whispered. "He is so young," said another, "so full of life." "Let us taste him," the fair one breathed. "Just a little taste." Jonathan found he could not move, could not cry out, could only stand frozen as the women surrounded him, their cold fingers trailing across his face, his neck, his chest. Their breath was like winter wind, their eyes like dark wells, their lips parting to reveal teeth. Teeth like the Count's, long and sharp and terrible. The fair one leaned close, her lips brushing his throat. "No!" The Count's voice shattered the spell. He appeared from nowhere, seizing the fair woman by the hair and hurling her across the room. His face was twisted with rage, his own fangs bared. "How dare you touch him? He is mine! He belongs to me!" The women cowered before their master's fury, hissing like cats but not daring to approach. The Count stood over Jonathan, his dark eyes blazing with an anger that was almost worse than the women's hunger. "This man is not to be touched," the Count commanded. "Not until I am finished with him. Go feed elsewhere. There are villages in the mountains, peasants who will not be missed. But this one is mine." The women retreated into the shadows, their eyes still fixed on Jonathan with undisguised hunger. The Count lifted him as easily as a child, though Jonathan was a grown man, and carried him back to his chamber, depositing him on the bed. "You should not wander at night," the Count said, and his voice had returned to its usual smooth, cultured tones. "My castle holds many dangers, not all of them as restrained as myself." Then he was gone, and Jonathan was alone with his terror, trembling beneath the covers, praying for dawn. But young Jonathan Harker was not a man to surrender to despair. Even in the darkest moments of his imprisonment, even as the weeks stretched into what might have been months, for he had lost all track of time, he never stopped searching for a means of escape. And finally, he found one. It happened by accident. During one of his daytime explorations, he discovered a section of wall that sounded hollow when struck. Further investigation revealed a hidden door, long forgotten, its mechanism rusted but still functional. Beyond was a narrow staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. Jonathan followed it, heart pounding, expecting at any moment to encounter the Count or his terrible brides. But the stairway was empty, the dust on its steps undisturbed for what might have been centuries. Down and down it wound, until at last it opened into a vast underground chamber. The chamber was filled with wooden boxes, 50 of them, arranged in neat rows, their lids open, and in each box, resting upon the dark earth that filled them, lay a figure. Some were the Count's brides, the 3 women Jonathan had encountered, now still and silent as corpses. Others were creatures he had never seen, their forms twisted, their faces distorted by ages of darkness. And at the center, in the largest and most ornate box of all, lay the Count himself. He looked different in repose, younger somehow. The lines on his face were smoothed, his skin less pale, his expression almost peaceful. Upon his lips was a smear of red, blood, fresh blood, still wet. He had fed recently. Jonathan felt his gorge rise. He wanted to run, to flee this terrible place and never return. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was courage. Perhaps it was desperation. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that this might be his only chance. He found a shovel leaning against the wall, a workman's tool left behind by some long-dead servant. He approached the Count's box, raised the shovel high, and brought it down upon the creature's neck. The blade was dull. The blow glanced off, leaving barely a mark. But the Count's eyes flew open, those terrible, ancient eyes, and fixed upon Jonathan with an expression of pure, primal rage. Jonathan ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, back up the spiral staircase, through the hidden door, through corridors he barely recognized. Behind him, he could hear sounds of pursuit. Not just the Count, but the brides as well, their screams echoing through the castle like the wails of banshees. He burst into his own chamber, slammed the door, pushed every piece of furniture he could lift against it. The door shuddered as something heavy struck it from outside. Once, twice, again. And then, miraculously, the assault stopped. Jonathan risked a glance through the window. The sky was growing light. Dawn was approaching. The sun that these creatures could not endure, that drove them back into their boxes of earth. That was Jonathan's one and only protection. He had until sunset to escape. If he failed, he would not survive another night. The solution, when he found it, was simple. Terrifying, but simple. The Count, Jonathan had observed, could climb walls like a lizard. He had seen him do it, descending the castle wall head first, his cloak spreading behind him like the wings of some great bat. If a monster could do it, perhaps a man could as well. Jonathan's chamber looked out over a sheer drop of several hundred feet. But the castle wall was old, its stones rough and irregular, providing plenty of hand and footholds. If he was careful, very, very careful, he might be able to climb down, or at least across to a window that was not locked. He packed his journal and a few essential items into a small bag, which he strapped tightly to his back. He removed his shoes, knowing that bare feet would grip the stone better. And then, as the first rays of sunlight touched the mountain peaks, he climbed out onto the window ledge. The wind was fierce at this altitude, tugging at his clothing, threatening to tear him from his precarious perch. The drop below was dizzying. Clouds actually floated below him, obscuring the ground. One slip, one wrong move, and he would fall forever. But he did not slip. Hand over hand, foot by foot, he made his way across the castle face. His fingers bled, torn by sharp stone. His muscles screamed with fatigue. But he did not stop. He found another window. The window to the Count's own chambers, he realized, as he peered inside. The room was richly appointed, filled with treasures accumulated over centuries. And there, on a desk, lay documents. Jonathan's legal documents. The deeds to Carfax, the shipping manifests for the boxes of earth, everything needed to facilitate the Count's move to England. Jonathan climbed inside. He gathered the papers, stuffing them into his bag. He searched for weapons, finding a knife, a length of rope, a tinderbox. He searched for money, finding a cache of gold coins in a hidden drawer. And then, in the very back of the Count's wardrobe, he found what he needed most of all, a heavy key, old and rusty, that he recognized as the key to the castle's front door. The sun was now fully risen. The Count and his brides would be sleeping, trapped in their death-like torpor until sunset. If Jonathan moved quickly, he might, just might, make it. A Konikachumkatron descended through the castle, moving as fast as he dared. The corridors were silent. The shadows held no terrors, not in the blessed daylight. He reached the entrance hall, fitted the key into the lock, felt it turn. The great doors swung open. Fresh air struck his face like a blessing. Sunlight, warm and golden, enveloped him. He ran out into the courtyard, across the cobblestones, through the outer gates. The mountain road stretched before him, winding down into the valleys below. Jonathan Harker ran. He ran until his legs gave out, then picked himself up and ran some more. He ran until the castle was nothing more than a dark speck on the mountain peak behind him. He ran until he found a road, a village. People who stared at this wild-eyed stranger as if he were a ghost himself. Somewhere in the chaos of his escape, his strength finally failed him. He collapsed in a dusty lane, his journal clutched to his chest, his mind finally surrendering to the exhaustion and terror that had sustained him for so long. The last thing he saw, before darkness claimed him, was the kind face of a nun bending over him, calling to others for help. He had escaped. Against all odds, against every expectation, he had escaped. But the Count was still coming. Somewhere on the dark seas between Transylvania and England, a ship was already sailing, its hold filled with boxes of cursed earth. And in one of those boxes, sleeping through the long voyage, was Count Dracula himself. The nightmare was not over. It had only just begun. Let us leave young Jonathan, dear listener, recovering slowly in the kind care of the sisters at a convent in Budapest. His mind has been shattered by his experiences, his body weakened by his ordeal. But he is alive. He will heal. And his journal, that precious journal, with its record of everything he witnessed, will survive to warn others. Let us turn instead to England, to London, that great gray city where life continues in its ordinary way, where people go about their business with no inkling of the darkness that approaches. Mina Murray, soon to be Mina Harker, if her beloved Jonathan ever returns, was a school teacher by profession and a romantic by nature. She was not what one might call a conventional beauty, but there was a warmth in her eyes, a kindness in her smile that made all who knew her love her instantly. She was intelligent, resourceful, patient, and brave, though she did not yet know how brave she would need to be. For weeks, she had not heard from Jonathan. His last letter had come from the castle in Transylvania, full of enthusiasm about his adventures and his hopes for their future together. Since then, nothing. She had written to him repeatedly, but her letters went unanswered. She had inquired through the firm of Hawkins and Associates, but they knew nothing more than she did. Her only comfort during this anxious time was her dearest friend, Lucy Westenra. Lucy was everything Mina was not. Beautiful, wealthy, somewhat frivolous, and tremendously popular with the young men of society. She had recently received no fewer than 3 proposals of marriage in a single day, and had accepted one of them. A certain Arthur Holmwood, heir to Lord Godalming, a young man of excellent prospects and unquestionable devotion. The 2 friends had arranged to spend the summer together at the seaside town of Whitby on the Yorkshire coast. It was a peaceful retreat, a place of ancient ruins and dramatic cliffs, where they could walk along the shore, take in the bracing sea air, and wait for news of Jonathan. Whitby, dear listener, picture it now. An old fishing town, built on either side of a narrow harbor where the River Esk meets the North Sea. On the eastern cliff stands the ancient abbey, a magnificent ruin, its Gothic arches reaching toward the sky, its stones worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Nearby is the old church of St. Mary, surrounded by a graveyard of weathered headstones, some so old that their inscriptions have worn away entirely. Below, the town clusters around the harbor, its streets narrow and winding, its houses painted in bright colors that gleam in the summer sunshine. Fishing boats bob at anchor, their nets spread to dry. Seagulls wheel and cry overhead. The salt air carries the smell of the sea, of fish, of tar and rope and adventure. It is a peaceful place, a beautiful place, a place where nothing bad could possibly happen until the night of the storm. It came without warning, a tempest of unprecedented fury, sweeping in from the sea with winds that howled like the voices of the damned. Rain lashed the town in sheets, lightning split the sky, thunder shook the very foundations of the ancient abbey. And into the harbor, driven before the storm like a toy in the hands of an angry child, came a ship. She was a Russian vessel, the Demeter out of Varna, and she was sailing dead. No hand guided her wheel, no voice called orders from her deck. She came through the harbor mouth at tremendous speed, driven by the storm, and struck the shore with a splintering crash that could be heard throughout the town. The townspeople gathered despite the storm, watching in horror as the ship broke apart upon the rocks. And then they saw something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. From the wreck emerged a shape, a great black wolf, or something that looked like a wolf, with eyes that gleamed red in the lightning flash. It leapt from the deck to the shore, paused for just a moment to survey the watching crowd, and then bounded away into the darkness, disappearing into the night as if it had never existed. When the storm subsided enough for men to board the wreck, they found only one living soul, the captain, lashed to the wheel, his hands still gripping it even in death. In his pocket was his log, and the final entry read, "It is here. I know it now. On the watch last night I saw it, like a man, tall and thin and ghastly pale. It was in the bows and looking out. I crept behind it and gave it my knife, but the knife went through it, empty as the air. But it is here and I'll find it. It is in the hold, perhaps in one of those boxes. I shall unscrew them one by one and see. I shall tie my hands to the wheel and burn some of my papers, and these shall be my last words. God and the Blessed Virgin and the saints help a poor, ignorant soul trying to do his duty. The cargo hold, when finally opened, was found to contain 50 wooden boxes filled with earth. Common, ordinary earth from some foreign land. They were consigned to a solicitor in London to be delivered to a property called Carfax. No one thought to question this. No one connected these boxes to the black wolf that had vanished into the night. The authorities ruled the captain's death a mystery and closed the investigation. But something had come to England, something old and dark and very, very hungry. And in the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen in Whitby. Lucy Westenra, dear, sweet Lucy, was the first to feel the shadow's touch. It began with dreams. She spoke to Mina of them in the mornings. Her lovely face troubled. Her eyes shadowed with a weariness that should not belong to one so young and vital. I dreamed of wings, she told Mina one morning, as they sat together in their rooms overlooking the harbor. Great dark wings beating against my window, and eyes, Mina, such terrible red eyes, watching me through the glass. I wanted to open the window, to let them in. Isn't that strange? I wanted so desperately to let them in. Mina held her friend's hand, concerned but not yet alarmed. Dreams were only dreams after all. The storm had unsettled everyone. It would pass. But it did not pass. Lucy had always been prone to sleepwalking, a harmless enough condition that usually manifested in nothing more troubling than a midnight wander to the sitting room. But now her nocturnal journeys took on a different character entirely. 3 times in a single week, Mina woke to find Lucy's bed empty. 3 times she searched the house in growing panic, only to find her friend outside, on the lawn, in the garden, once even on the path that led up to the old churchyard on the cliff. The 3rd time was the most frightening. Mina found Lucy sitting among the gravestones, her white nightgown luminous in the moonlight, her head tilted back as if in ecstasy. And bending over her was a dark shape, tall and thin, with eyes that gleamed red in the darkness. "Lucy!" Mina cried out, and the shape vanished, simply vanished, as if it had never been. Lucy woke with a start, confused and disoriented, and allowed Mina to lead her back to the house. In the morning, Lucy remembered nothing, but Mina noticed something that made her blood run cold. 2 small puncture wounds on the side of Lucy's neck, red and raw, as if made by the fangs of some terrible creature. "I must have scratched myself in my sleep," Lucy said dismissively when Mina pointed them out. "Or perhaps a brooch pin came loose. It's nothing, dear Mina. Please don't worry." But Mina did worry. She worried very much indeed. Their holiday at Whitby came to an end, as all holidays must. Lucy returned to London with her mother to prepare for her upcoming wedding to Arthur Holmwood. Mina remained at Whitby a few days longer, hoping for news of Jonathan. And then, at last, news came, though not in the form she had expected. A letter arrived from a hospital in Budapest, informing her that Jonathan Harker was alive, but very ill. He had been found wandering in the mountains, half mad with fever, and had been nursed back to health by the sisters of a charitable order. He was asking for her. Mina did not hesitate. She packed her bags, secured passage on the next available ship, and set out for Budapest. Within a week, she and Jonathan were married. A simple ceremony at his hospital bedside, with the sisters as witnesses. He was not the man she remembered. The ordeal had aged him terribly. His hair had begun to turn gray at the temples. His eyes held shadows that had not been there before, and he flinched at sudden movements, at unexpected sounds. He would not speak of what had happened to him in the castle, though he pressed his journal into her hands and begged her to keep it safe. "Do not read it yet," he whispered. Perhaps never, but keep it. If anything should happen to me, if I should not be myself, the journal will explain everything." Mina promised. She tucked the journal away without reading it, and devoted herself to nursing her husband back to health. Meanwhile, in London, Lucy Westenra was dying. The doctors could not explain it. She was young, she was wealthy, she had access to the finest medical care in the world, and yet day by day, she grew weaker. Her skin became pale as paper, her lips bloodless, her eyes huge in her thinning face. She slept for hours upon hours, yet woke more exhausted than before. She refused food, complained of strange dreams, and bore upon her neck 2 small wounds that would not heal. One of Lucy's rejected suitors was a man named John Seward, a doctor who ran a lunatic asylum near the property called Carfax. Though his proposal had been declined, he remained devoted to Lucy's welfare, and it was he who first recognized that her illness was beyond ordinary medicine. "I have seen many strange conditions in my work," he confided to Arthur Holmwood, who had been keeping vigil at Lucy's bedside. "But nothing like this. Her blood seems to be draining from her body. Yet I can find no wound, no explanation. The marks on her neck, they are too small to account for such loss." And yet, Arthur grasped at any hope. "Is there nothing to be done?" Seward hesitated. "There is a man, my old professor from Amsterdam. He is unconventional, but he has knowledge that goes beyond the medical texts. Knowledge of things that most doctors would dismiss as superstition. If anyone can help Lucy, it is he." "Send for him," Arthur said without hesitation. "Whatever the cost, whatever he requires, send for him at once." And so Abraham Van Helsing came to London. He was a striking figure, dear listener, a Dutchman of middle years, with a broad forehead, keen blue eyes, and an expression of intense intelligence. His English was excellent, if occasionally oddly phrased, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had seen much and understood more. His examination of Lucy was thorough and unsettling. He studied the wounds on her neck with particular interest, asking questions that seemed, to Arthur and Dr. Seward, entirely irrelevant. Had she been sleeping with her windows open? Had she complained of nightmares? Had anyone noticed a large bat or unusual dog in the vicinity? When he had finished, Van Helsing's face was grave. "I must return to Amsterdam," he said, "to consult certain texts. In my absence, you must follow my instructions exactly. The windows of her room are to remain closed and locked at all times. These flowers," he produced a bundle of white blossoms with a pungent, garlicky smell, "are to be placed around her bed, around the windows, around the door. She is not to remove them under any circumstances. Do you understand?" Arthur and Seward exchanged bewildered glances, but they agreed. Anything to help Lucy. For a few days, Lucy improved. Color returned to her cheeks, strength to her limbs. She laughed and talked almost like her old self, and even managed to eat a little soup. Arthur dared to hope that the crisis had passed. But on the third night, disaster struck. Lucy's mother, seeing her daughter distressed by the smell of the flowers and concerned that the closed windows were preventing fresh air from reaching her sick room, opened the windows and removed the garlic. She meant well. She always meant well. But her actions were catastrophic. That night, Lucy suffered her worst attack yet. She was found in the morning barely breathing, her lips blue, her pulse almost undetectable, the wounds on her neck gaping fresh and raw. Mrs. Westenra, who had a weak heart, collapsed from the shock and died within the hour. Van Helsing, summoned by emergency telegram, arrived to find chaos. He immediately ordered a blood transfusion, a new and dangerous procedure, but Lucy's only hope. Arthur gave his blood first, then Seward, then Van Helsing himself. Even Quincy Morris, another of Lucy's rejected suitors who had come to offer his support, rolled up his sleeve and gave what he could. Lucy rallied. Briefly, she rallied. But each night brought a new attack, and each morning found her weaker than before. It was as if something was draining her as fast as they could replenish her. At last, Van Helsing gathered the men together, Arthur, Seward, and Morris, and spoke to them plainly. What I am about to tell you will strain your belief. It will challenge everything you think you know about the world. But I beg you to listen with open minds, because only by understanding our enemy can we hope to defeat him. He paused, looking at each man in turn. The creature that is killing Miss Lucy. It is a vampire. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Arthur laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. A vampire? Professor, surely you cannot be serious. Vampires are legends, fairy tales to frighten children. Vampires are real, Van Helsing interrupted, his voice firm. I have studied them for 30 years. I have seen evidence of their existence on 3 continents. They are creatures of darkness, of ancient evil, condemned to exist by drinking the blood of the living. They cannot bear sunlight, which destroys them. They cannot bear garlic or holy symbols or running water. They sleep during the day in coffins filled with the earth of their homeland and arise at night to hunt. He gestured toward Lucy's room. The marks on her throat are the marks of a vampire's fangs. The weakness, the pallor, the dreams, all classic symptoms of a victim being slowly drained. And if she dies from this, if she dies before we can stop the creature. What? Arthur demanded. What happens then? Van Helsing's face was filled with sorrow. Then she too will become a vampire, undead, immortal, cursed to prey upon the living for all eternity. The sweet, innocent Lucy you love will become a monster. That night, Van Helsing himself stood guard over Lucy's room. He had reinforced the garlic, the crucifixes, every protection he knew. But the enemy was cunning. A wolf, a great gray wolf that had escaped from the London Zoo, appeared at Lucy's window. Its howl shattered the glass. The wind swept the garlic blossoms from the bed. And in the moments before Van Helsing could reach her, Lucy Westenra died. She was laid to rest in the family tomb in Hampstead Cemetery. A beautiful girl in a beautiful gown, her face peaceful in death, her golden hair spread upon the pillow of her coffin. Arthur wept as if his heart would break. Seward and Morris stood in grim silence. Mina, who had returned to London upon hearing of her friend's illness, arrived too late to say goodbye, too late to do anything but weep at the grave. Only Van Helsing knew that the worst was yet to come. In the weeks that followed Lucy's funeral, strange reports began to appear in the London newspapers. Children were going missing in Hampstead, disappearing at twilight, found the next morning wandering and confused, with small wounds on their necks. They spoke of a bloofer lady who had called to them, played with them, and hurt them just a little before letting them go. Van Helsing read these reports with growing dread. He knew what they meant. He knew what had to be done. "You must come with me to the cemetery," he told Arthur one evening. "Tonight. I must show you something that will break your heart, but it must be shown. You must see with your own eyes, or you will never believe." Arthur resisted at first, outraged at what he saw as desecration of his beloved's grave. But something in Van Helsing's manner convinced him. They went together, Van Helsing, Arthur, Seward, and Morris, equipped with stakes, hammers, and holy water. The tomb was sealed with lead. It took considerable effort to open it, but when they did, the coffin was empty. "Where is she?" Arthur gasped. "Has someone taken her body?" "Wait," Van Helsing said. "Wait and watch." They concealed themselves among the tombstones, and as the moon rose, they saw her. She came drifting through the cemetery like a ghost. But she was no ghost. She was Lucy, or what had been Lucy, her white gown stained with blood, her lips red with feeding, her eyes blazing with an unholy light. In her arms she carried a small child, unconscious, its head lolling back to expose its tender throat. Arthur made a sound, a cry of horror and grief and disbelief. Lucy heard it. She dropped the child and turned toward them, and her beautiful face twisted into something monstrous. "Come to me, Arthur," she crooned, her voice like poisoned honey. "Leave these others and come to me. My arms are hungry for you. Come and we can rest together." Arthur stepped forward, entranced despite himself. Van Helsing moved between them, holding aloft a crucifix. Lucy hissed like a snake, recoiling from the holy symbol, her face contorting with rage. "You see now," Van Helsing said quietly. "You see what she has become. The Lucy you loved is gone. What remains is a shell inhabited by a demon. We must release her. We must give her peace." Arthur's face was wet with tears, but he nodded. "Tell me what to do." They followed Lucy back to her tomb, where she had retreated before the crucifix. Helsing showed Arthur what must be done. The wooden stake positioned over the heart, the hammer raised high, the single powerful blow that would end her cursed existence. "You must do this," Van Helsing said. "You who loved her most. It is the last gift you can give her. Freedom from this terrible unlife." Arthur took the stake. He took the hammer. He looked down at the creature in the coffin, the creature that had Lucy's face, Lucy's hair, but not Lucy's soul. And he struck. The scream that came from the thing in the coffin was not human. The body thrashed and convulsed, spraying blood, its mouth opening wide to reveal terrible fangs. But Arthur did not waver. He struck again and again, driving the stake deep, until at last the creature lay still. And then, in the flickering candlelight, they watched a miracle. The monstrous expression faded from Lucy's face. The terrible fangs receded, her features smoothed into the peaceful expression she had worn in life, the gentle, loving expression of the Lucy they had known and cherished. It was as if, in death, she had been returned to herself. Van Helsing completed the ritual, severing the head, filling the mouth with garlic, ensuring that Lucy would never rise again. Then he turned to Arthur, who had fallen to his knees beside the coffin. "She is at peace now," Van Helsing said gently. "The real Lucy, the Lucy you loved. She is free. And somewhere, I believe, she knows what you have done, and she is grateful." But the creature who had made Lucy a vampire was still at large, and Van Helsing knew that stopping him, destroying him utterly, was the only way to ensure that Lucy's fate would not befall countless others. It was time to hunt the Count. The full story came out in pieces, dear listener, as the hunters gathered their information and their strength. Jonathan Harker, recovered at last from his ordeal, returned to London with Mina. His journal, finally read by those who needed to know its contents, provided crucial insight into the nature of their enemy. Here was proof that the Count existed, that he had survived for centuries, that his plans for England were vast and terrible. Van Helsing organized the group: Jonathan and Mina, Arthur, now Lord Godalming after his father's death, Dr. Seward, and Quincy Morris, the American with his Bowie knife and his brave heart. Together, they pooled their knowledge and formed a plan. "The Count has brought 50 boxes of earth from Transylvania," Van Helsing explained. "Without this earth, he cannot rest safely during the day. If we find these boxes and destroy them, fill them with sacred wafers, make them unusable, we remove his sanctuaries. We leave him vulnerable." "But where are the boxes?" Jonathan asked. "They were shipped to Carfax, the property next to my asylum," Dr. Seward said. "But I believe some have been moved. The Count is cunning. He would not keep all his eggs in one basket, as you English say." That very night, the hunters descended upon Carfax. It was a ruined old mansion, its walls covered in ivy, its windows dark and empty. The chapel on the grounds had long since been desanctified, a perfect lair for a creature of darkness. They broke in through a side door, armed with crucifixes and stakes, holy water and communion wafers. The smell that greeted them was indescribable, the smell of ancient earth, of stagnant blood, of something long dead that refused to stay buried. In the chapel, they found the boxes. 29 of them remained, arranged in neat rows, their lids loose, the earth within dark and rich. Of the Count himself, there was no sign. "He is not here," Van Helsing said, "but he has been here recently. The earth is disturbed. He knows we are hunting him." They sanctified the boxes one by one, pressing sacred wafers into the earth, reciting prayers that would render them useless to the Count. Then they searched for clues to the location of the remaining boxes. The hunt that followed was long and arduous. The Count had scattered his boxes across London, in houses he had purchased, in warehouses he had rented, in locations that would have been impossible to find without Jonathan's legal knowledge and Dr. Seward's local connections. One by one they found them. One by one they sanctified them. The Count's options were narrowing, but the Count was not passive. He knew he was being hunted, and he struck back. The attack came when they least expected it. Mina, left behind while the men pursued leads, was visited in the night by the Count himself. He came through her window as mist, coalescing into his terrible form beside her bed. He hypnotized her with his ancient eyes, made her drink from a wound in his own chest, and drank from her in turn, forming a bond that would eventually transform her into a creature like himself. When Jonathan found her the next morning, she was pale and trembling, a red mark upon her forehead where Van Helsing's holy wafer had burned her flesh. She was halfway to becoming a vampire. But Mina Harker was not a woman to surrender to despair. Even as the Count's corruption spread through her veins, she fought. She demanded that Van Helsing continue his work upon her, using hypnosis to tap into the psychic bond between herself and the Count. "When he is near," she explained, "I can sense him, and under hypnosis, I can see through his eyes, feel what he feels. Use me. Use this curse he has placed upon me against him." It was a dangerous gamble. Each trance brought Mina closer to the Count's influence, made her more vulnerable to his control. But it worked. Through her, they tracked his movements, learned his plans, discovered that he was fleeing. He had escaped by ship, taking his last remaining box of earth, sailing back toward Transylvania and the safety of his mountain castle. If he reached it, they would never be able to touch him. He would wait, perhaps for decades, until the hunters were dead and forgotten, and then return to try again. They could not allow that. The hunters split up, taking different routes toward Transylvania. Jonathan and Arthur went by rail, the fastest route. Seward and Morris went by sea, following the Count's ship. Van Helsing took Mina overland by carriage, the most dangerous route, but the most direct. As they traveled, Mina's condition worsened. The mark on her forehead grew darker. Her skin became paler. She began to develop an aversion to sunlight. Time was running out. The journey eastward was a blur of trains and carriages, of foreign languages and unfamiliar landscapes. The hunters pushed themselves to the limit of human endurance, knowing that every hour brought the Count closer to safety and Mina closer to damnation. Van Helsing's route took him through the very mountains Jonathan had described in his journal. He saw the forests that seemed to grasp at travelers, the mists that gathered without warning, the peasants who crossed themselves and muttered prayers when his destination was mentioned. He understood now why they were afraid. He and Mina arrived at the castle first, that great dark fortress on its mountain peak, just as Jonathan had described it. The Count was not there yet. His ship had been delayed by storms, but the castle was not empty. The 3 vampire brides still waited within. Van Helsing fortified a circle around Mina, using sacred wafers and holy symbols to create a barrier the undead could not cross. Then, as dawn approached, he descended into the castle depths. He found the brides in their coffins, beautiful and terrible in their death-like sleep. One by one, he drove stakes through their hearts. One by one, he severed their heads. One by one, he freed the souls that had been trapped in those undead bodies for centuries untold. It was hard work, terrible work, but necessary. When it was done, the Count's reinforcements were destroyed. He would return to an empty nest. The Count's party arrived as the sun was setting on the last day of the chase. A group of Roma, hired by the Count, transported his box of earth on a great cart, racing toward the castle gates. Behind them, closing fast, came Jonathan and Arthur on horseback, with Seward and Morris approaching from another direction. What followed was chaos. The Roma, seeing armed men approaching, tried to fight. Quincy Morris was stabbed in the struggle, a knife slipping between his ribs. But the hunters did not waver. Arthur and Jonathan reached the cart, prying open the lid of the box, even as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountain peaks. Inside lay the Count, his eyes open but unable to move as the sun still touched the sky. He snarled at them, his ancient face twisted with fury and fear. For the first time in 500 years, Dracula was helpless. Jonathan raised his kukri knife, a great curved blade he had brought from his travels. He brought it down upon the Count's throat, severing the head with a single powerful stroke. At the same moment, Quincy Morris, mortally wounded but still fighting, plunged his bowie knife into the Count's heart. For a moment, the Count's body seemed to resist. Then, before their very eyes, it crumbled to dust. The ancient evil that had terrorized these mountains for 5 centuries was finally, irrevocably destroyed. Mina cried out, a sound of pain, then relief. The hunters turned to see her standing at the castle gates, Van Helsing at her side. The mark upon her forehead was fading. The pallor was leaving her cheeks. As the Count died, his curse died with him. She was free, but their victory was not without cost. Quincy Morris, brave Quincy, lay dying in the bloody snow. Jonathan and Arthur knelt beside him, holding his hands as his life slipped away. "I'm glad," Quincy whispered, looking at Mina's healed face. "Worth it. All worth it." And then he was gone. They buried Quincy Morris in Transylvania, in a quiet churchyard that looked out over the mountains he had helped to liberate. A simple stone marked his grave. Quincy P. Morris, a gallant gentleman. The journey home was subdued, grief mingling with relief. The Count was destroyed. Mina was saved. Lucy's death had been avenged, but they had lost a dear friend, and the scars of their ordeal would never fully heal. Jonathan and Mina returned to England, to the quiet life they had always dreamed of. Jonathan became a partner in the law firm, his reputation established, his career secure. Mina devoted herself to her home, to her community, to the husband she loved more than life itself. A year after their return, they welcomed a son. They named him Quincy, in honor of the man who had given his life so that Mina might live. Van Helsing visited them often, bringing news of Arthur, who had found peace at last and was rebuilding his life, of Seward, who continued his work with the mentally ill, armed now with knowledge that most doctors could never comprehend. They were bound together, these survivors, by experiences that no one else could understand. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would gather in Jonathan and Mina's sitting room and speak of what they had endured. Not with fear, the fear had faded, but with a kind of wonder. They had faced an ancient evil and prevailed. They had walked through darkness and emerged into light. "We have learned much," Van Helsing said once, bouncing young Quincy on his knee. "We have learned that evil exists, real evil, not metaphor or symbol, but genuine darkness that hunts in the night. But we have also learned that good exists equally, that courage and love and faith can triumph, even against the most terrible adversary." He smiled at the child, who giggled and grabbed at his spectacles. "This little one, he is proof. He is hope. He is the future that we fought to protect." And so, dear listener, our tale comes to its end. The castle in the Carpathian Mountains stands empty now, a ruin among ruins. The wolves still howl in those ancient forests, and the local peasants still cross themselves when they pass its shadow. But nothing stirs within its walls. The darkness that dwelt there has been vanquished. In London, life goes on. The gas lamps glow in the evening streets. The omnibuses carry their passengers to and fro. Lovers walk together in the parks, and children play in the gardens. And no one, almost no one, remembers the horror that once threatened to engulf them all. Jonathan and Mina Harker live quietly, happily, watching their son grow. Sometimes Jonathan wakes in the night, troubled by dreams of ancient castles and red eyes gleaming in the darkness. But then he feels Mina's hand in his, hears her gentle breathing beside him, and he knows that he is safe. They both are, safe and home and loved. The shadows hold no power over those who walk in light. And now, dear traveler, our journey through the darkness is complete. We have walked together through ancient castles and moonlit mountains, through storms at sea and quiet graveyards. We have faced terrors that most never imagine, and emerged safely on the other side. The tale is told. The story is finished. Feel the peace settling over you now, like a soft blanket, like a gentle mist. The night outside your window holds no dangers, only stars, only quiet, only the gentle rhythm of the sleeping world. Your breath comes slowly, easily, naturally. Your body is heavy and warm, sinking into the comfort of your bed. Your mind is quiet, at peace, ready for the gentle oblivion of sleep. There are no vampires, dear listener, no monsters in the shadows, only the night, which is beautiful in its darkness, only rest, which awaits you with open arms. Let your eyes close now, if they haven't already. Let your thoughts drift away like clouds on a summer breeze. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to think about, nothing at all but this moment, this breath, this peace. Sleep now. Sleep and dream of golden sunlight and green gardens, of loved ones and laughter, of all the beautiful, ordinary moments that make up a life well lived. The Count of Shadows is vanquished. The light has won, and you are safe. Perfectly, completely, wonderfully safe. Good night, dear traveler. Sweet dreams until we meet again.